I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. It looks like we got a pretty intimate group here. So I think if Paulette's okay with it, if you guys want to put cameras on, we can promote a more free interaction here. Kind of keep things a little more casual. I just wanted to introduce our speaker today. So Dr. Paulette Vincent-Ruz is a postdoctoral associate in chemistry education at the University of Michigan. And she has a very unique background perspective. And I think I'll let her just go ahead and dive right into that and, talking about herself. So I'll hand that over.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I never know. It's not that I never know. It's that, okay, so we won this one and then I play and then you're all seeing my presentation. Did I do this correctly? Cool. Yes. Sometimes I don't know. Something is weird. So hi, my name is Paulette Vincent-Ruz. If you are a Twitter person, you may know me and you can find me on Twitter as STEM-Ed. There's gonna be one or two questions that we're gonna do interactive. So there's the link below, just so you know. The setting of the poll is to anonymous. So even if it asks you for your name when you log in, when you start, your name won't be recorded with your answers. The objective of this is to be really casual, real conversation, really for people to share what they think, what they have experienced. So I want this to be a really safe space for people to actually be curious and talk about things that they are trying to understand, right? This talk is a little bit on the basic information side because I never know how much people are aware of in general. This is a topic that people seem to have a wide breadth of knowledge from. But the thing that I want to focus today is really about switching this sort of language that we use about allyship to accomplices, right? Or advocacy. And so that is sort of what I'm going to be talking a little bit today, but that is just a little introduction. I want to start by acknowledging where I am. I am currently, as they said, a University of Michigan. The University of Michigan is standing today in what used to be in which is the rightful lands of the Odawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Wyandot people. And so I think it's very important to recognize whose land we're standing in and our relationship to colonization based on that. So this is where I am, right? All around there. You're familiar with Michigan, we're an arborist. And it's really interesting because usually I would say the land acknowledgement of the place I was going, but now with COVID and everything being remotely, I usually just say this is where I am. So if you don't know whose land you're standing in, I invite you to reflect on it and to study the history of indigenous disenfranchisement in the area you're in, so you get more familiar about how you got to where, how that place became the place that it is. So about me, so Paulette Vincent-Ruz, I identify as queer or pansexual. That means I'm attracted to people of any gender. I'm an academic. I have a PhD in learning sciences and policy, and I was trained as a chemical engineer. So I started my career as a really science-focused person. I wanted to do a PhD in organic chemistry. I was all in for it. But life took me to a different place. And today what I do is focused on chemistry education research. And I specifically study how can we dismantle barriers for students in academia and specifically in chemistry? And that means I do a lot of work with faculty and students to figure out what are the things that exist that we don't think about. So many times we think about oppression, about really explicit kind of things, about things that we may say explicitly. But a lot of times the way things are coded nowadays, we need to really try to look at the policies, the rules, the unspoken things that we have in our departments and our schools and how those are affecting students. And we don't often think about them because they've been there for a while and we're just following along, right? And we have a lot of things to worry about in life. And so sort of what I'm doing in my research is think about what those things are, how to change them, how to work with faculty, with departments to change them. And so I'm an academic. I am an immigrant. I was born in Mexico City. I moved to the United States in 2014, which was an interesting time to move because I got to live through a lot of things during grad school. So I have an accent, as you can see, well, as you can hear. So, right, even though I may look really white presenting, and I may even have a little bit of a European phenotype, because one side of my family is European. The moment I open my mouth, I'm an immigrant, right? And a lot of people get shocked sometimes when they get to meet me in really informal spaces because they think I'm something, and they suddenly are like, wait, you are not who we thought you were, right? And so the way I experience race is really, really different, right? I get a lot of white privilege. I'm never gonna be stopped by a policeman, like just because, right? I'm gonna be pretty safe in that sense. But sometimes in certain places, I speak up and they hear the accent, they realize I'm Mexican, and people change their attitudes towards me. So it's just what it is. And I'm also a cis woman. That means that the sex that was assigned at birth to me matches my gender identity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the talk. But that also means that I get that level of privilege, right? That the way I present myself and the way I identify myself is consistent with societal expectations. And so I don't have to pretend otherwise in certain spaces. And so the reason I share all of this with you is because I think it's really important to think about our relationship to power. There's things in our lives where we get oppressed. You may be first generation, you may come from a low income household, you might identify as a woman, right? So those are things that we typically associate with oppression. But you may also experience things that give you privileges, right? You may be white, you may be cis. Having PhD sort of gives us a layer of privilege, right? And the reason why it's important, I think, is not to create a competition, right? I think we've turned this talk about oppression and identities into sort of a competition about who's more oppressed than other people. But the reason why we should reflect on this is just to be able to be empathetic, right? To be able to extend kindness to others, right? That is why I love talking about this. And the other reason is to know what is our lane. Where does our experience end, and where should we just sit down and listen, right? And so by reflecting on this type of things, I personally have learned that it's become easier for me to be kinder to people, more empathetic to people, and also to learn. And to put myself in situations that may make me uncomfortable, that may make me be upset about things that I used to believe that were wrong, right? But be open to that kind of change. So I invite you, right? So now the thing is open. So I invite you to log in and write some words about your positionality. It can be about the things that are really important to our identity, right? That relate you to power structures, just like I did. So go ahead and do that. And the link should be at the top of the slide.
Links at the top.
Yeah, if not, it's gonna be here at the bottom. So let me write it in the chat. That would be more useful. Poll. Okay, that should do it. Okay, now we're here. It should work. And I don't know. I'm gonna close real quick because my pointer is making my life hard. Okay. Okay, so we have a couple of words there. And maybe this is what people have answered, and it's like a word cloud, so maybe a lot of people answer the same thing, so maybe that is what it's also happening. It should not appear as many words. Oh yeah, now we're getting it. Yay, okay. Look at this. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing that. I'm gonna close the chat again because I thought that was gonna be a problem with that. And it's loading. Okay, so thank you for sharing this to any of you that shared your identities with us. So as you can see, there's a big mix, right? And we often stay with only what we see on the person superficially, and there's a lot of things that we don't get to see on people. And so thank you for sharing about your ethnicity, your orientation. I think, yes, being a chemist, a biochemist is really important to our identities. So as you can see, right, every time we are in a group of people, we usually don't know, right, what is under the surface. And there's a lot of chemists and a lot of women and a lot of white people here and a lot of cis people, which is expected from an allyship talk. So this is all par for the course. Okay, so things you should know about what's going to happen is that thank you so much for being here, wanting to educate yourself and be better for people. I think it's just a huge, great first step. So thank you. 2, you may get uncomfortable or angry at certain things, and that is normal. I'm not talking just about my talk right now. I'm talking about just in general. I think we have not been, we don't talk often about how doing equity work and talking about equity and changing systems. It's really uncomfortable. It's really tiring. I cry multiple times a week, right? And it's not a happy thing that you just get to post on Instagram and be like, hey, hi, diversity, #happy, right? It's things that make us uncomfortable and often like challenge a lot of things that we have believed and have experienced since birth. And so that is why I think it's good for you to know that it's normal, that if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're not growing. Think about when you were in grad school, when you were in college, and you were facing a difficult subject, but you eventually learned it, right? And that was uncomfortable. It is the same, because this is learning, and learning is hard. Learning is hard. Even if we're all smart people, learning is hard. And then the other thing is that I don't represent everyone in this community. I came out late in life. So I have not been, I sometimes joke that I have not earned my stripes yet. I usually shy away from giving talks like this because I don't feel like I'm the best representative for the LGBTQIA community. Because of that, there's a lot of people that have been doing a lot of work on doing outreach and advocacy, and that have put themselves out there. And I will signal when the content is not mine because of that. And so I hope that what I tell you today is just a tiny part of like a journey for you all to learn and to learn more about these topics. So I just want you to share, when's the first time you can remember some learning that some people are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer? I'm gonna share, I did ballet since I was 5 years old. So to me, knowing that people were gay was a thing, at least males, right? Being gay was a thing that I just always remember being a thing. So even though I come from a very conservative country, Mexico is not, like, I would say, the most progressive country in many ways, because I was a child that was in an environment where men being gay was sort of seen as normal. I sort of saw it as normal, right? I don't remember explicitly being told whether that was good or bad, right? I don't remember having conversations with my parents about it when I was younger. I know the beliefs my parents had about queer people as I grew up, but I never explicitly sat down to have a conversation with them. I actually didn't question who I was until I was quite older, but in retrospective, I think that happens is that I was like, oh, I should have known. I should have known I was not straight. And so a lot of my curiosity happened in high school. I think that is really normal for some people because that is when you start feeling attraction for other people. And the way I experienced it is that I tended to have really intense relationships with women in terms of friendship. Well, I was in an only girls school, so like in my head, these were only friendships. And so in my head, these were like just super intense friendships, right? That we will talk with each other all the time. We wanted to be with each other all the time. We will like love each other to death. We would maybe date people, but we would not feel for our dates the way we felt for each other. And we never put a label to it. I never coded it in my head as like I am attracted to women. But I always thought it was a weird thing about me because I knew not everybody had this intense type of relationship with people. So some people have said that when they were younger, some people in high school, somebody just shared that their second teacher was gay and their mom in 1974 was very graceful and it was always an okay thing. I think that is sort of how my parents talked about it too. I think the way my parents talked about it is they didn't say it was like a bad thing. They were not like, I mean, they're terrible, no, right? But they were like, you know, maybe not ideal. 5 years old, that is really young. So and that is changing. I do think that nowadays, kids these days, I say kids these days like if I'm older, but like are growing in consciousness about this. Okay, you learn from watching TV. It depends on people's age, right? As I think in the 90s and early 2000s, there's starting to be some gay characters on TV. So maybe it was something that we could see from TV versus before. So yeah, thank you for sharing your first remembering. And so like a reason why this is important is because being aware of other people being different than us is one of the things that like mark a lot, not only how we identify ourselves, but how we relate to others. So I'm gonna make an analogy to race. There's a lot of people that I have friends that come from really small towns that didn't had any people of color in them. And so they didn't got to see people of color until they left their towns. I, for example, even though Mexico has a lot of brown people, there was not Black people around me when I was growing up. And so the first time I saw a Black person in person was when I came to the United States on a trip. And so those kinds of things, right, shock kids. And we may even ask really non-prudent kind of questions about it, because they are like, when we're kids, we just see things are not matching the things we're used to, right? So this is one of those things where like, it's not about being super explicit, but just like having certain elements of representation as you grow up and as you present kids as they're little can be really helpful, because that way they see things as normal. Okay, so why do we call this an LGBTQIA umbrella? The LGBTQIA plus acronym is one of the most complicated things in the world. It's really complex. The reason it's very complex is because it is actually talking about people that don't fit the norm, quotations, right? Or the expectations on a wide different variety of things. And that may be your gender identity, your gender expression, your physical and emotional attraction, or your sex assigned at birth, right? So before, and I'm talking about 20, 30 years ago, we only talked about LGBTQIA plus openly, right, as the physical and emotional attraction, right? It's not that queer people have always been there, but the way we will mainstream talk about it was mostly about who you loved, who you didn't loved, right? As time has progressed, we're now having conversations about people that their sex assigned at birth does not fit their gender identity, or whose gender expression is very, very different. And so anybody that fits into the LGBTQIA umbrella has one or more of these things that don't fit traditional expectations. So for example, right, I identify as pansexual. So as a woman, I'm expected to only like men, right? So my physical and emotional attraction does not fit that box, right? However, my gender identity, my gender expression, and my sex assigned at birth do fit traditional expectations, right? I identify as a woman. I tend to dress feminine. I like wearing makeup. I express my gender in a very girly way. Usually I love pink. Pink is my favorite color. If I go to Disney World, I want all the princesses' autographs, right? So in many ways, right, I only live the LGBTQIA experience through this small thing, right? And part of the confusion of the umbrella, I think, is that is really hard to comprehend or to explain, that some people may just only be different in one of these categories and maybe experiencing this in one of these categories. And also it makes hard to relate between us, even as LGBTQIA. Don't think that like, just because we're put into the same label, we love each other and we treat each other like all happy. There's a lot of tension amongst us because of this, because even certain ways of being LGBTQI come with more privileges than others, right? And so the confusion about why there's so many letters, why there's so, like, I understand it, right? Maybe one day we won't need these labels, right? Maybe one day it's just another way of being. Being LGBTQI is just another way of being your person, right? So we won't need an acronym and letters and diagrams to explain who we are. And so yeah, that is, I want to recognize that is where one of the struggles comes from people both out and inside, right? And even from people inside the LGBTQI community, there's a lot of misconceptions about the way we believed we were supposed to be. So even there's tensions about people we think should not be here or should be here as part of the umbrella. So if you ever, you can Google this, that it's called the gender identity unicorn. The graphic is by the Trans Student Education Resources website. I find it really useful. It helps me, it does help me explain to my mom how was I different when I came out of the closet. A lot of people were confused about the word pansexual and if that meant I was trans or non-binary, which isn't, right? And so like I've used this sort of graphic with my parents to sort of try to explain how am I different, right? But also how am I not fit certain identities that they thought were being mixed with the word pansexual. I also use it with some of my cousins that now that I'm the LGBTQI person out, I have a cousin that has kids and she really wants to do good by her kids. So she sometimes texts me questions. And so so I use this to sort of help her understand, right? So her little boy right now is loving using her makeup, right? And this is just a way of expressing, right? And it may be something the kid will stop doing in a couple of years, and so like these are sort of conversations about how these things are different, right? And you can be straight and love, for example, to do drag, right? So your gender expression that you want to express through drag, right, which is dressing as a woman or in a way that defies gender expectations, actually doesn't have anything to do with your physical and emotional attraction. Okay. So the misconception of coming out, there's this misconception that once LGBTQI people say they're out, we're out, right? It may be true depending on who you are, but this is specifically not true for trans and non-binary individuals. This slide is by two of my colleagues, Isaac and Michelle. And so the reason why being out for trans and non-binary people is very, very different is because being trans and non-binary has to do with your gender identity, right? So that means the way you see yourself does not match your sex assigned at birth, and that usually is connected with the way you want to express yourself, right? And so the problem is that people that identify as trans and non-binary, when they are in the world, and that means in the school, in their workplace, right, they need to adjust how out they are depending on whether there's structures or conditions that allow them to do so, right? But also like on whether they feel safe or not. And so they may have to be almost changing things. Well, not almost, they may have to mask who they are when they're at work versus they're at home. And that is the thing that is different from other LGBTQIA identities, because, I can go to work and never talk about who I love, right? That is something that I can do, right? But when it comes to who you are, your pronouns, your name, the name that gets referred to you, the pronouns, the bathroom you use, right? The things that make you comfortable in your own skin, that is like a whole other layer, right? Like it's a whole other layer of hiding and living in secret. And so when we're talking about outness, I want you to understand that even if you are aware of some of your students or colleagues being queer, but specifically for trans and non-binary people, even if you're aware of their identity, that doesn't mean, right, they get to live their lives as fully as they want or can because of the world. And so if you know it or not will depend on the conditions you set as a person, on whether they feel you're a safe person to be who you are, but also on the conditions of the workplace you're in. So as you are all chemists, this is an ACS event, you may be professors, PIs, staff, people that interact with students or grad students in a regular basis. I want to talk a little bit about how to become accomplices and how to, what are the things you can do to sort of make the place better for LGBTQIA students. But before I do that, I'm going to pause my presentation for a second. I'm going to stop the sharing. And I want to see if there's any questions, thoughts, comments up to this point. If there's nothing, that's fine. I will just continue, right? But I want to see if there's any, where are we all at right now?
I think something that may be useful also, if you guys are interested, I could stop the recording, or after you're done with the presentation, I can stop it. That way we can have some more free discussions. I don't know what people are feeling here, but I definitely don't want to deter any conversations that we may be having due to a recording. So please speak up if you'd prefer that we have.
Put in the chat if you prefer to have this discussion post when the I think this is a great idea, Christine. Thank you.
Yeah, I just I thought as things were going through my mind, I was like, we should probably think about that.
No, that's great. No, that I think it's a great idea.
Okay, I'll plan on cutting the recording.
We'll do it after
it's done, and then we can check in with everyone.
Perfect. So I'll do play. Okay, so university level policies. These are the things that maybe you have the least influence in. Depends on, some of you may be more associate dean level or more closer proximity to the people in power. But a big barrier for LGBTQI students is biases in the application format. So that would mean the format does not acknowledge that there's, when they ask for gender, it only says male, female, other. Having the word other is othering, right? It doesn't, like, I know it sounds like obvious, but like you're like signaling immediately, right? That you're putting people in a category you're like not caring about, instead of having an option with multiple options. And I know there's a lot of gender identities also having options that says I define gender in this box is valid. Unnecessary dissemination refers to when students are not sure, they can tell you their gender identity and their preferred name because of who you're going to share this information with. So for example, a thing that has happened a lot in a study that we're doing about trans students and non-binary students when they're applying to chemistry departments is that when they're asked about their preferred name and pronouns, they don't ask the students if they're the people that are writing their letters of recommendation are using those names and pronouns too. Some students have been accidentally outed when their letters of recommendation, their request for letter of recommendation goes out. The other side is that people ask for preferred names and pronouns and the place never uses them. So it feels that students are being asked to out themselves for nothing, just to be misgendered and for using their name wrong all the time, right? So that is what we mean by unnecessary dissemination. It's really important that as universities, it's okay to collect this data, but it's really important that we're really transparent about what the purpose of that data is. Why do we care about that data? What are we going to use it? If we're going to be asking students about their gender identity, is it because we're going to look for policies to improve a student's gender? So not only hoard data for nothing, right? Okay. Allyship. So allyship is behavior that I'm not going to classify it as bad or malicious. It's good, right? But it's also not super active. So allyship is really a word of almost like, I support you, right? But it can be really performative. And it almost says like, I support you because I'm allowing you to exist in this space. However, what we want people that have close proximity to power in any way to do is to become accomplices. And that means to actually speak up and fight for the things we've been talking about. So that means that talking about getting comprehensive healthcare for your students, implemented protections for LGBTQIA students, meaningful initiatives, right? Speaking up, even if you're not part of this community, the fact that you speak up for those things is signaling to others that you're willing to go beyond the just sticker kind of behavior. Okay. There's also department level policies. The culture of science is a barrier. The reason the culture of science is a barrier is because we have this sort of belief that who we are, our identity is not relevant. Who cares if you're Black? What does that have to do with the fact that you're Black? What does the fact to do that you're trans or non-binary has to do with science? You're just supposed to do the science. That makes us forget that for many of us, the science we do is personal, and we want to do science that actually helps our communities because we've seen the damage science has done to them. It also denies the fact that we're whole people, that we don't leave who we are at the door when we're crossing into our labs, right? And so this idea that we must remain 100% objective and who we are does not matter doesn't influence the research is actually a big barrier to LGBTQI students. So allyship is having a sticker, being willing to talk with student. Again, this is not bad, right? But what I want to push you to is to be more. That means being outspoken in meetings. Not only speak with students behind closed doors, speak for them without saying their names on meetings. Make a clear and accessible mechanisms of reporting in your lab or in your department when somebody is being is mistreating students, and normalize the use of pronouns. It's really, really, really important that we normalize the use of pronouns, because that way we're signaling to people that it's okay that they use pronouns that are different. And so normalize it every time you can. Give an opportunity to normalize the use of pronouns so students don't feel like they're the ones requesting others for it to work. And then research school level policy. Other is like the lack of diversity, hyper competitive attitudes. If you ever see me give a talk in other settings before that is not related to LGBTQI issues, I usually talk about how we have this idea in chemistry that a chemist is this person that spends thousands of hours in the lab and only reads and only thinks about chemistry. Those type of cultures in the lab are not great because they create this idea that anything is a weakness. And ergo, every time you have an identity that does not fit the norm, is seen as a weakness. And the lack of diversity also will signal students that, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be safe in that place. How do I know I want to join that lab? So that is a barrier. And so think about a purposeful recruitment of students. Think about really who you've been recruiting and why you've been drawn to certain type of students. And think about, you know, opening up a little bit to different things. But the most important thing is that in allyship terms is not to have this all opinions matter attitude. And I'm going to talk about more about it, but that is a huge barrier because having this idea that all opinions matter makes the place very, very unsafe for marginalized students. So it's really important that as a PI, you have a code of conduct. So students know what they can and cannot do in terms of respecting others. That students know there will be consequences for doing malicious things, right? And it doesn't mean kicking somebody out of your group, but it does mean like consequences, right? And have a commitment to educate yourself, change and challenge your beliefs and the beliefs of others. Even if you do the basic things, students notice and they will grasp to that. Like there's so few things that give us signals of safety and that people are willing to learn, that the moment we see somebody do it, we grasp at it, we hold on to it. And I swear to God, every time that we want to quit, we will remember that thing. And that is the thing we're going to hold on to remain in place. Okay, so what do I mean by this all opinions matter? So having this idea of like, all viewpoints are welcome and it's great. When we do this, the oppressive stance always wins. Why? Because that is the average. The status quo is oppressive, right? And so we work by the average. We work for the majority. Then what we end up living with is the status quo, right? And there's no community agreement of what is acceptable and not acceptable. And this works both ways, right? So what I'm trying to say is that I'm not saying that because you become LGBTQIA friendly, you are not friendly to people that are religious. That is not true. What I'm saying is that there must be community agreements about what is respect, what can be said to people, right? And how we should treat others. But I think the most important thing is that it's really important that we understand that the right to exist is not up for debate. So when we have this sort of all opinions matter sort of viewpoint, we put identities of people up for debate of existence, right? And so somebody might be trans or binary, and we're creating environments where some people can be like, well, I don't believe you exist. I don't believe you should exist, right? So we're allowing a space where somebody can challenge our right to existence. And that is the thing that we want to avoid, right? We want to avoid creating this sort of environments. So it's really important that we're really explicit, that we promise intervention whenever there's oppressive group dynamics, right? And that we consistently challenge things that are oppressive and that should not be tolerated. Okay, and so I think that is, oh, no, sorry. Okay, so supporting students, things you can do leaving this meeting, because I know I said a lot of stuff. So things you can do, like if you're like, Paulette, what are the things that I can do as soon as I leave this meeting? Okay, pronouns. There is a place to include, do so. If there is not, make it so. Okay, pronouns. Develop a code of conduct for your lab, right? Explicitly state commitment to remove barriers. Talk with people to ask what are the barriers. Hold yourself accountable, right? Students know when you promise things and you don't fulfill them. And acknowledge there's differential needs for trans, non-binary, and LGBTQI students that may be physical or mental. Some students need support when they're transitioning, and that is physical support. The hours might get weird in the lab. They might not be able to spend a lot of time standing up, either going through certain parts of the process. But there's also this mental need about how our health is constantly being attacked because of like laws that are being passed, about things that are happening on the news, right? And so acknowledge that sometimes students cannot produce at 100% because our heads are constantly thinking about how it is unsafe to exist somewhere else. So these are 3 things you can do immediately after leaving this. And I invite you to continue to educate yourself. That can be following people on Twitter. That can be reading a book. And just, allow yourself to feel that uncomfortableness and allow yourself to challenge yourself whenever you think you have the full knowledge about a situation, especially when we've been raised in this very traditional kind of way. I say this as somebody that was raised as the most traditional Catholic woman that you can imagine, right? It's hard, but I promise you it's worth it. Okay, so I'm gonna, and finally, this is not a checklist. These are just steps where to start, right? But it's not a thing that you can just check off your list and then it's done, right? It's constant reflection, it's constant mistakes. You will make a lot of mistakes. I make a ton of mistakes, and it's just a matter of asking forgiveness for them and just showing that you can do better. So that is sort of like the basis of all this discussion, right? And now we can talk, have a conversation. Christine can stop recording so everybody's safe to say what they are meant to